everyone. We are with the Secretary General of IFRC today for the inaugural WHF Talks live, and it is such an honor for me to conduct this with such an inspirational leader. We will be touching upon the role of the IFRC in times of COVID-19, effective leadership, where we are standing with the development and climate change issues, and of course understand the challenges. Thank you, Jagan, for making the time today. I would like to start with my first question to you. The IFRC movement with all its national societies has often been the first to respond on the ground to humanitarian crisis. How has been the IFRC's response and support to national societies so far during COVID-19? And here I would like to also add, what lessons from previous crises are informing the IFRC's response during COVID-19? And what do you think will be the most important lessons carried forward from the COVID-19 pandemic to inform future approaches?
Thank you for having me here. I feel really honored that I could be part of this inaugural discussion. And I really want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. As you know, since the establishment of the International Federation, one of the main emphasis has always been in responding to the health crisis. Now, we just celebrated our centenary last year. And if we go back to the history, the Federation was created after the 1918 pandemic flu. Some people refer to it as a Spanish flu. Which killed, some estimates says 15 million people. It was the aftermath of that and the First World War, the IFRC was created. And now when we enter our second centenary, actually, it was such an unfortunate coincidence that we entered our second centenary with another pandemic. In many ways, our national societies have been used to responding to the crisis. Almost every week, every month, there is one crisis or the other that's happening around the world, unfortunately, and we are quite used to responding to this to those type of crises. But in many ways, this crisis has been very different in the sense that it has now affected every country in the world, and it has also affected, rich and poor, many communities around the world, and it is spread very, very fast. From that point of view, it has been quite different. Also, the speed and the intensity of the spread of the infection have been unprecedented, and the way it has affected the entire world has been unprecedented, at least for us in our lifetime. Now, some of the experience we have from the past have been very, very helpful, and those are, mobilization of volunteers at the community level. A lot of the health crises, they start in the communities and they end in the community. So without the involvement at the community level with our volunteers and with our local branches, local chapters, the response to health crisis becomes very, very difficult. So we were fortunate to have those experience and those branches and those volunteers in the field who have been, of course, in the front line of this crisis. Of course, a lot of times in a number of countries that capacity needs to be supplemented. So we have, the global systems and tools, the global guidelines. And of course, we benefited from that global guidelines. Of course, one thing big different this time was we could not mobilize the global expertise because of the lockdowns and the fear of transmission. So we had to change our way of providing that technical support from physically moving the experts to providing online advice. So we have created online help desks in different areas of technical expertise. One of the other big things that's been extremely important here is the trust you build in the communities. Especially in a crisis like the pandemic, the trust becomes extremely important. And in this crisis, as you saw, the infodemics, the misinformation that went around, especially in the early days. And a lot of times people didn't know which was the right information and which was not. At that time, getting the information from a trusted source becomes extremely, extremely important. And I think this is that trust, and you cannot build trust in the middle of the crisis. The trust has to be built before. In the middle of the crisis, you just have to go and respond. So that trust we have built over years in the communities have been, of course, extremely important. We are still learning because as the pandemic continues to expand and moves to different parts of the world, we are still learning. I think the scientists are still learning about the virus. So we keep our minds very open that the knowledge we have from the past may not be sufficient. So we are also investing on quickly analyzing the new data and adapting our response very rapidly so that we can be more relevant and we can be more effective.
Thank you for the answer. In the conversation that you brought up, I started thinking about the positives and negatives of the COVID-19, and also at the same time you mentioned data sharing and so forth. I'm going to ask you another question about that, but I would like to emphasize the positives and negatives of COVID-19. As the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, you have been working on campaigns, awareness campaigns from WASH to Keep Clapping and May 8th tributes. These have become a symbolic thank you for the efforts of all movement volunteers and health workers that are in the front lines. Acts of solidarity, humanity, kindness have increased and have continued to inspire. However, on the other side of the coin there is also another truth. Stigma, political unrest, social tension are also side effects of COVID-19. Can you comment on first the positives of COVID-19 and the success of your campaigns? And second, what can be done or is being done to mitigate the current negatives of COVID-19 at an institutional and local level?
No, thank you for that. And I think you touched on some of the positives and some of the negatives of these pandemics. Of course, what we saw during this crisis is the unprecedented solidarity within our Red Cross Red Crescent movement family, but also not only with the wider humanitarian sector, the governments, the private sector, coming together in an unprecedented solidarity. And as you mentioned, this kindness of volunteers, but not only kindness, the bravery of the volunteers, being on the front line. And in the early days, actually, as we were still learning about the virus, some of the volunteers were actually even ready to go in the front line, even when we did not know enough what type of risks were there. A number of them actually took upon themselves to go and provide that services. One very interesting, sad but very heart-touching incident happened when we got the news of the death of a volunteer in Italy, a young man, who volunteered himself to be the ambulance driver, and he was driving to the hotspots, and unfortunately he died. And of course, it was a very, very difficult moment for all of us. But then the next day, when many other volunteers had to go to the work, what we saw was not a single volunteer decided not to turn up. Everybody turned up to do what they were supposed to do. And actually, we had more volunteers in almost every country in the world wanting to come and volunteer. So that very, very sad news of death of a volunteer did not deter other volunteers. It shows that humanity, that passion and that compassion. And I think this crisis has brought that out. And it has shown that the humanity is still alive. We still have people who absolutely believe on the service. We absolutely believe on saving lives. We absolutely believe on sacrifice for the good of the others. And for me, that's probably the most important positive that has come out because of this crisis. We see a global solidarity and research. We see scientists from all over the world coming together, sharing the information, and really speeding up the production of the vaccine. And of course, some of the news we are hearing are actually quite positive. The speed with which the science has made progress are positive, although we still have some way to go. But as you said, it has also exposed some of the negatives. It shows the stigma. It shows, unfortunately, a number of countries looking inward. Even in a crisis like this, which is spread in weeks from one part of the world to the other part of the world, some countries want to look inward. And that sort of baffles me at times, that how can you, in a crisis like this, just think that you can protect your country or your community or your village? That's simply not going to be possible. Because this crisis is touching everybody and every country. And for us to be safe, everyone needs to be safe. So I hope the global leadership will continue to push for that global solidarity and openness. It also showed the promises that haven't been met for many decades, the promises that was made in Alma-Ata around the primary health care, the promises made in many, many other conferences, investing on community health and the public health. And it exposed that in many countries, including in some of the rich countries, that many communities didn't have sufficient basic health infrastructure. And if they have the health infrastructures, they don't have the doctors and nurses. And if they have the doctors and nurses, they don't have equipment and medicines. So it exposed that weakness in our health system and the commitments we haven't kept as the international community and the national leadership. Of course, there have been progress made, so I'm not trying to undermine the progress that has been made over many years. For those people who cannot go to the doctor, who cannot seek a basic treatment, of course, for them, that progress means nothing because it hasn't reached them. So it has exposed that we have still a lot to do in these communities and in these countries to invest on our public health capacity, building on community health, really building that capacity at the local level. So when crisis like this happens, actually the communities are prepared. And for me, this is probably one of the biggest lessons. For me, I hope that today's leadership will take, and in the future, we will be more serious about investing at the local level, at the community level.
Thank you. As I mentioned, the other question I will have is going to be on the use of technology and data sharing. Yeah. While COVID has raised serious challenges, questioning how international institutions respond to pandemics, it has also raised potential opportunities for improvement in humanitarian response, particularly through the use of technology, data sharing, and cross-sector collaboration. How have new technologies, data sharing, and cross-sector cooperation changed our approaches in responding to this crisis? What other technological tools has the IFRC been implementing to respond to COVID-19? What are the safeguards put in place to make sure the core principle of no harm, especially regarding the sharing of health data, is prioritized in these uncharted times?
I think it's a very important point you brought up. Probably one of the positives of this crisis has been the acceleration on the use of technology, the digital technology. I think probably, in years to come, we will probably remember how much this crisis has accelerated the digital growth. And I think this has, in many ways, has been a positive learning that has forced the organizations and individuals to adapt to the technology. And I think people who felt that they could not use technology have been now experts on using the technology. So this has been probably one of the very positive developments. And as I mentioned earlier, we have also seen this also in the research, in the development of the vaccines and the treatments. I think the science has made a tremendous progress. So that is, of course, a very, very positive. One of the things what we have done from within the IFRC is, of course, using the technology to ensure that our existing programs, as well as the COVID response, continues as we have planned. And I must say that it has been largely a positive experience, that despite all of the restrictions on the movement, we have been able to continue supporting those programs, carrying out those programs, sometimes in very, very difficult environment, like the Ebola response in Democratic Republic of Congo. It continues. The response to Mozambique, the recovery program we have been having in Mozambique continues. The recovery program in Bahamas continues. So I think the technology has enabled us to do to ensure that some of this very important program continues on top of the response to COVID, of course. But what we have also managed to do with the use of technology is to create a virtual support mechanisms. In a number of countries, if our volunteers or our branches need that capacity, there are very quick trainings, then this can be provided online, virtually. So we have created this helpline. We have the pool of expertise from all around the world coming together. And actually, when there is a need and there is expertise, so we can connect them virtually. So it has become a very efficient way of actually sharing knowledge and data. We have also created a number of platforms for volunteers around the world to come together and share their knowledge. And not only share the knowledge, but also support each other. Because sometimes in this time of crisis and stress, to be able to talk to someone who is doing similar tasks, who is also going to the front line, who is also saving the lives, who is also really working in a very high stress environment, to be able to talk to each other and share the experience can be extremely helpful. So we have also managed to create those type of networks for volunteers to come together. We have also managed to create the platforms for the leaders to come together, because if we want to sustain some of the positive changes that has happened during this crisis, it is very important that there is a leadership learning and leadership buy-in. So we are going through a series of leadership lessons learning exercise, and also the exercise to identify some of the changes that we have brought in now, sustain in the future. So actually this has been, from the digital learning point of view, a very positive experience. Of course, we also have to be extremely careful when we go to the digital sphere. One is, of course, the whole safety and security of information and data becomes very important. As you have probably seen, the hacking and phishing has increased by 1,000 times. The hackers have been using this opportunity to try to hack into the systems. And that has multiplied by 1,000 times. Even in our organization, we had to put a dedicated capacity just to ensure that our systems are safe and secure. And in this environment, of course, the data of particularly the people we are working with becomes extremely important. So we have a Red Cross Red Crescent movement-wide data policies and the guidelines. We are closely adhering to those guidelines. And we are doing everything in our capacity to ensure that the data we have is not misused or hacked into. So far, it has worked very well, but we take this extremely seriously, and we will continue to invest on that.
Amazing. I'm going to touch upon the leadership questions and effective leadership, but before that, you recently highlighted that in regards to COVID-19, unless every country and community is safe, no country and community is safe. Each country and community find themselves in different stages now. Some are easing lockdown measures, others are just finding themselves in the middle of the pandemic, like Latin America and parts of Africa. Not only that, but communities have a very diverse ability to respond effectively to this pandemic. What is the way forward to keep the momentum of a global, holistic, but also localized response? How can communities work better together to realize the message that we can't leave no one behind?
I think this is a very important message, and especially in the context of some of the countries trying to look inwards. No country is safe unless every country is safe. No community is safe until every community is safe. The virus has its way of spreading out. So the only way to effectively manage this crisis is that we have that global solidarity. And the global capacities, expertise, and resources come together and being made available everywhere would be very important. And I think this is where the test of leadership comes. The leadership, of course, organizations like ourselves, the leadership in the private sector, leadership in the government, and leadership at the community level becomes extremely important. We have to, this is a time where we have to stop thinking that protecting me is sufficient. Unfortunately, it is not. So that means sharing of the knowledge, sharing of the resources, sharing of the expertise, and sharing of the tools available everywhere it is needed becomes very, very important. And I think, as you see, the communities are really organizing virtually. They are reaching out. They're reaching out. They are learning from each other, and they are supporting each other. And the individuals and the communities are showing the way here, that it is possible to reach out globally. Now, there are, of course, there are some very important elements to keep in mind, particularly now, as there is a huge investment around the development of the vaccines. And unfortunately, in some situations, the countries are trying to sort of keep the vaccines for themselves first. And we are one of those organizations calling for people's vaccine. As you know, just 2 weeks ago, together with the UN Secretary General, our president and the ICRC president called for people's vaccine, that this should be made available for everybody. This is of course morally right that we make it available for everybody. But this also has a very practical meaning, that until everybody is safe, nobody is safe. So this is where I think we need to all come together. Vaccine is just an example. And of course, once the vaccine is available, and I believe it will be available, the vaccines don't deliver by themselves. They have to be delivered by somebody. And this is where the organizations like ourselves, the IFRC, and many other organizations with the presence in the communities, will have to partner with the government and the private sector and other organizations to make sure that these vaccines get delivered to the communities where they are needed. Now, right now, there is also a very, very serious issues we are seeing around the world. Just a couple of weeks ago, the information came that around 80 million children may be deprived of the regular vaccines, things like measles and diphtheria and polio. And if these children miss out on that, the loss on human lives, and of course, the productivity would be very, very severe. So we cannot ignore the fact that while we respond to the COVID, there are also other diseases still killing children, it's still killing women, it's still killing elderly. So when we develop the response for the COVID-19, having that holistic and integrated approach, and not ignoring some of the other health challenges would be extremely, extremely important. So the domestic and community level response, complemented and supported by the global solidarity and global sharing and global generosity, would be the way to defeat this virus.
Thank you for the amazing message. We discussed leadership. You touched upon on it briefly. As leader of one of the organizations that is a reference to all other actors, local and international, in the response for COVID-19, what is your message to leaders today, and how would you describe effective leadership?
I think probably the number one message for myself and many other leaders is, I believe that the eyes of the world are on us. How we conduct ourselves, how engaged we are, what type of response we are having, the type of engagement and the type of compassion we have is extremely, extremely important. This is not a normal crisis. This is an unprecedented crisis. This is not a localized crisis. This is a global crisis. So having that understanding that requires a global solidarity is extremely, extremely, extremely important in today's leadership. What is also important is to have that compassion, that anybody affected in any part of the world should affect all of us. And of course, this is also the time of a lot of anxiety and lot of stress. And as you saw, the mental health needs are increasing rapidly. The domestic violence are increasing rapidly. A lot of people are saying that, listen, to try to save my children from virus, but I'm losing them because of hunger. That is also happening around the world. So having that compassionate leadership who can think multiple issues at the same time would be extremely, extremely important. But also we need the leadership who ensures that the hope is alive. Of course, this is a crisis. This is very, very stressful. This is affecting millions of us, and hundreds of thousands have been killed. But at the same time, we have to demonstrate that hope and optimism as we go forward. The science coming together, research coming together, the resources coming together. And if all the leaders come together, we can find solution to this crisis. We can continue to save life. We can continue to contain the virus, and hopefully we can eliminate it one day. So leadership that can respond to the current crisis, that is up to the challenge of responding to the current crisis with compassion and engagement, but at the same time, the leadership that can continue to inspire hope for the future is extremely important. And I believe that collectively, we have to demonstrate that leadership. Otherwise, the future generation will look upon us and probably measure us in that yardstick. And we have to pass that very high benchmark.
Thank you. I would like to touch upon the localization aspect. We know how important the localization approach has been for the Red Cross movement and progressively for all other international agencies. How have the national societies' approaches to COVID changed depending on their environment? And what is the level of best practices that have been shared between them?
I think, in many ways, of course, for 100 years, we have been having a very localized response. In many ways, the localization is not a new thing for us. It's been there since the very beginning. We have always heavily relied on volunteers at the community level, at the local level, at the branch level, at the chapter level. So in that sense, this is really not new for us. What is new is the scale. What is new is actually the intensity of the crisis and the speed of the crisis that engulfed the world so fast, so quickly. And primarily that is new. But at the same time, what also is new in some sense is that the duty of care we needed to protect our staff and volunteers. Generally, when you go to respond to the earthquake, for example, the duty of care in responding to this type of pandemic has to be at a very, very different level, because the volunteers and the staff can be infected very, very rapidly. So while the volunteers are taking the risk to their own lives to be on the front line, it is extremely important for the national societies to ensure they have the right information and right protective equipment to be able to do their job in a safe manner. Now, on the issue of how the localization could move forward, if you look at the plans we developed this time, basically the 80% of our response plan is domestic. The 1.9 billion Swiss franc appeal we launched a couple of weeks ago, almost 80% of this is basically domestic resource mobilization. And this is very, very different. We have seen this time that only around 20 to 25% is coming as international solidarity to support the domestic effort. But 75 to 80% has been that domestic effort. So for me, the localization is not only about getting the money internationally and hand over locally. It is also about that local leadership, that local ownership, the local involvement in the planning, design, and delivery, but also the local participation. And what we've seen this time is almost 1/3 of the support that many of our national societies has mobilized locally in their own domestic context has been up to 33%, and which we saw as a real localization, where there is an engagement, ownership, but also resourcing locally. And the international solidarity is coming as in complement to the local action. So from that point of view, I think we are very proud of the work done by our national societies and our local branches and the local volunteers. And we are deeply, deeply thankful to those partners in the countries, those private sector partners, those individuals, those governments who have been so generous in providing resources to the national societies at the local level. And for me, that's the future of localization. And this crisis has shown that even in this unprecedented level of crisis, we can actually further reinforce the approaches of localization, and we'll continue to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, there is the learning going on between the volunteers, among the volunteers in many parts of the world, but also the leaders around the world, but also at the technical level. There are many technical groups regularly sharing the ideas and knowledge and the new innovations. And we'll continue to build on some of these incredible innovations and experiences as we move forward.
Amazing numbers that you shared, definitely giving a lot of hope in the strength of the localization. I would like to touch upon other issues alongside with COVID-19, I mean other humanitarian issues. As Mr. Francesco Rocca mentioned recently, the challenge of COVID-19 is not standalone. Other crises, natural disasters, conflicts, protracted crisis, including food security, don't cease to exist because of COVID-19. But the attention to COVID-19 in terms of resources, funding, articulation has been impressive and overwhelming. What are the lessons learned from this, and how can we ensure these issues aren't sidelined? How to engage different sectors in the same way to tackle other important humanitarian and development shortcomings?
I think this is extremely important. And as you mentioned, our President, Francesco Rocca, has been highlighting this, that just because we are dealing with COVID, we cannot ignore the other existing humanitarian crisis, health crisis, disaster crisis. As I was giving the numbers before, 80 million children are missing out on their vaccines. You know, the health gain that have been made over years will be lost very rapidly, and we will have to invest significantly higher amount of resources to regain some of those gains. Of course, the people who are affected by conflict, or the people on the move, the migrants and displaced people, they continue to have their humanitarian needs unmet. There are, of course, the recovery programs that I was mentioning before from Mozambique or Afghanistan or Bahamas. You know, the people continue to be in need of those supports, or the camps in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, or the Lake Chad area or the northern Nigeria. You know, these crises continue to affect people. Millions of people displaced from Venezuela, for example. And I think one of the pillars when we designed our COVID response, and we designed around the 5 pillars, and one of the pillars there was that we cannot ignore the existing humanitarian crisis. Of course, this stretches our capacity at times, but for the people who are affected by other crises, they are equally affected. You know, it's not less on them. So we have absolutely made deliberate attempt to make sure that some of those crises continue. But the big lessons learned, as I was mentioning earlier, is real investment at the community level at the time when we are not facing with the crisis. And I think over years of development, and I think there have been enormous progress economically, education-wide, on the health field over many years. And I think we should absolutely celebrate that success we have made before. But we still, we have millions and millions of people who don't have access to basic healthcare, primary healthcare. Millions and millions of people who don't have access to water or a simple soap. We have been conveying this message that wash your hands 20 seconds with soap and water. But there are hundreds of millions of people who neither have water nor have soap. What happens to them? And I think in this 21st century, even those basic services not being available to hundreds of millions of people is not acceptable, should not be acceptable. And I hope that this crisis really pushes the global leadership to invest on those areas and share the prosperity. I mean, the world, there is enough in the world to be shared. There are enough resources to address some of these crises. There are enough resources to build those hospitals and primary healthcare centers and get those toilets built or the water supplied. Now we have to commit as the global leadership to make that happen. Otherwise, we'll get into this, the Jim Kim from the World Bank, the former president of the World Bank had said about the cycle of panic and neglect when it comes to dealing with the pandemic. A pandemic comes, everybody is panicking, everybody talks about changing the world. The pandemic finishes, everything gets neglected again until another pandemic comes. So I really hope that we will get out of the cycle of neglect and panic when it comes to pandemics, but also a number of other crises. I think the world has means, the world has resources. What we need is that real commitment and action to make sure that this investment happens.
Thank you. One of the largest points that we have been trying to promote is public and private partnerships, which is one of the UN SDG goals. There are numerous ways in which businesses can support pandemic response, providing specific guidance and assistance to support not only responses to COVID-19, but also, as I mentioned, the UN SDGs as a whole. In the opinion of the IFRC, which are the best ways for businesses to collaborate in responding to this crisis, and in which ways can the private sector provide support to you?
I think a number of ways private sector can contribute, and as I mentioned before, of course, they have been a major contributor on our domestic response on this crisis. But the first thing they can do is, of course, look into their own companies and make sure that their workers and their families are getting the type of support they need. Of course, one of the impulse could be to ensure the profit, that you hire people and all that type of thing. Layoff can happen. I think it's very, very important that the companies ensure that support is provided to their staff and their families, and making their workplace safe would be extremely, extremely important. I think the second thing they could do, and which I know it's already happening in many countries, is repurposing some of their capacity in support of the COVID response. I think a number of companies repurpose their capacity to produce PPEs and ventilators and the masks and things like that to address the short supply globally. And I think because they have the know-how and they have the ability to very rapidly repurpose their capacity, and I think a number of them are doing, and I think in some countries there are still gaps, and they could do that. Third is really investing on the research and development, because that's where the private sector has a massive capacity and the resources to do that. And maybe finally, but also be generous, as they have been in supporting the resources, both in kinds, but also in the technical expertise of their people, but also with the funds, because those things are all needed at the moment. And I must say that in different areas, I have seen that absolute solidarity from the private sector, the public sector, and also the humanitarian sector coming together. And I see this is probably one of the positives in this crisis, that it has inspired or forced all of us to come together and collaborate better, because the crisis is just so unprecedented. No one can respond to it alone.
Thank you so much for your time today. These are unprecedented times, and I know you have a very busy schedule. So on behalf of World Humanitarian Forum and the Advisory Board, we would like to present our deepest thank you for making us the time. And I would like to address my last question to you. Actually, it's your message. What message do you wish to give to all volunteers, national societies, partners, and the international community, considering these difficult times? And what is your message for the future?
I think really, for me, the message to our volunteers and national society is simply thank you. I think the work they have been doing, that we are so grateful for their commitment, for their dedication, really being in difficult places, being in the front line. You are our real heroes. We would not have achieved what we have achieved without the work of our volunteers, without the work of our frontline staff, without the work of the national society leadership. It would not have been possible. So thank you. I think we are very, very proud with the work that we have done together. I think with the wider humanitarian community and the leadership, my key message is, let's not start looking internally. Let's not start closing ourselves. This is a time for global solidarity. This is a time for compassion. This is a time for engagement. This is a time for sharing, because only through that we will be able to defeat this pandemic. And I see a lot of that already happening. And I see many leaders absolutely advocating for this. And I would like to continue to join them to advocate for that global solidarity. If it doesn't bring us together, what else can?
Thank you so much for the great message. Thank you personally, and thank you to IFRC for keeping us safe in these difficult times.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you so much. And I really, really want to thank you personally, and of course the World Humanitarian Forum for this incredible opportunity to talk to you and share some of the thoughts. And I wish you all the best, actually, in your endeavor to bring the world, all the humanitarians of the world together.
Thank you so much, and look forward to the next one. It has been a very stimulating and encouraging conversation. I'm sure it's going to be, welcomed massively, and the audience will benefit from this a lot. Thank you for your time once again, Jagan.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hope to keep in touch. Take
Okay.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.